So I would like to welcome today Abram Bailey. Abram has a website called Hearing Tracker. He's an audiologist by training, and his website has a lot of great content about hearing aids, trends on the market. I just want to say thank you so much, Abram, for accepting our invitation and presenting for the Knowles Corporation of the trends that you see in the hearing aid market. With that, I'll turn it back to Abram.
A little bit about my background. I'm a doctor of audiology. I did practice clinically for about 5 years. During that time, I was in New Zealand. After going to Vanderbilt University, I got my AUD there, spent a lot of time in New Zealand, loved it, but then decided to come back to the US to be closer to family and start up Hearing Tracker as a consumer platform for hearing aid reviews. So it's essentially morphed into this shopping resource where consumers can understand the landscape, understand all the different technology and products. So that's where I'm at today. I've been doing that for about 7 years. The first thing that I wanted to say was that this presentation is going to focus on hearing aids, not on personal sound amplifiers, but I did want to give an overview of what the two classes are, broadly speaking. Hearing aids are, strictly speaking, FDA-regulated medical devices that are dispensed by state-licensed hearing care professionals, and they're typically fitted in person, although given the last year, there has been an uptick in the number of hearing aids that have been fitted remotely. So oftentimes with remote care, we're just talking about people getting follow-up adjustments with hearing aids that were fitted in person, but there have been more providers moving to a remote fitting of hearing aids. And then of course, we've got the online channel, which we'll talk about. And just the overview of PSAPs is that they're essentially amplification products, but they're not intended to be worn by people who have a hearing loss or as a treatment for hearing loss. So they're really intended to help people with a hearing problem that they maybe have in a certain situation, like a difficulty in a background noise, or maybe even for people who are hunters that want to hear the deer rustling in the leaves far away, that sort of thing. Those are supposed to be PSAPs. But what's happened is that PSAPs have essentially become more like hearing aids over time, and it's a little bit of a gray area where a lot of PSAPs are performing like hearing aids. They have many hearing aid-like functions now, and as I'll get into, sometimes PSAPs are being sold as hearing aids. So this is kind of the starting point, right? You go to Google, you type in hearing aids, and it's very confusing. And this is one of the things I wanted to walk people through today, is that you've got a lot of products that are coming up on Google that are not exactly hearing aids in the traditional sense. So when you type in hearing aids and see ads popping up, you're essentially seeing a mix of actual hearing aids and big six hearing aids that are being sold online. You're seeing hearing aids that are essentially purpose-built for being sold online. And then you're seeing personal sound amplifiers being sold. So it's all kind of in the mix of hearing aids. So what we've got going on here is you've got essentially the FDA registered hearing aids that are designed for online sale. So going back, that's like the Lively's and the EarGos and that sort of thing. This is what I'm calling novel disruption, or maybe a legitimate online sales channel. So there are hearing aids popping up that are FDA registered. They're being sold online. They're purpose built for that. And it is very complicated. EarGo just did an SEC filing. If you go through and you read that, you will find that they face a very complicated regulatory environment, especially at the state level. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but what I wanted to say as a caveat is it's a legitimate channel, but there is a complicated regulatory environment. And then you've got the bad actors, and I'll go over just a couple of examples of each of these in the next few slides, but you've got amplifiers, so PSAPs that are essentially being marketed as hearing aids, FDA registered, FDA approved, sometimes FDA cleared, which is all pretty misleading. Then you've got amplifiers and hearing aids being advertised as over-the-counter hearing aids. And this is a product class that doesn't technically exist yet. And there's been warnings from multiple attorneys general and the FTC selling consumers essentially that this product class doesn't exist yet. So don't fall for false advertising. And then you've got hearing aids which are being sold online through gray market channels. I'll go through that too, but that's essentially like Phonak hearing aids being sold direct to consumer, where the seller doesn't actually have permission from Phonak to be doing that. Right. So of the bad actors, the first one is amplifiers being advertised as hearing aids. So this is just an example. Here you can see where they're advertising these PSAPs as hearing aids, and they've even got that FDA approval down there. And here's another example of that. You know, they say FDA registered hearing aids. This is clearly a PSAP. I actually asked them in their chat if they could send me a link to their registration for that device, and no one got back to me. It's been a few days, so I'm assuming that that is a correct assumption. And then you can see, you know, on Google that there's multiple advertisements going on to this day about over-the-counter hearing aids. I actually clicked on a couple of these links. The first one brought me to this page, which doesn't actually say over-the-counter here, but it did in the ad, right? Once you get to the page, they don't have that on there, so it's sneaky. But when you get to this page, it's actually kind of like a listicle of top 10 things. They're trying to make affiliate money by people clicking off to these different websites. And they've got everything from traditional hearing aids being fitted through a licensed provider network like Hear.com or Zip Hearing, to things that are probably PSAPs like a Hearing Hero, to maybe some of these direct-to-consumer FDA-registered products. So it's kind of a mix, but none of it's over the counter. And then that's another link bringing you to a slightly different layout where it's maybe more of a shop. But I think, again, it's, you know, PSAPs, maybe some FDA-registered hearing aids, but none of them over the counter. Last example of this is you can see on Facebook where over-the-counter hearing aid ads have been popping up. I've seen a number of them over the years, ever since the OTC thing happened. And you can see like this one on the right here, that channel has actually been shut down. So I'm guessing false advertising, maybe the over-the-counter stuff, maybe something different. And then I told you I'd talk a little bit more about this. This is an interesting table showing which of the big 6 manufacturers you can buy online at various online resources. So, you know, House of Hearing, Discount Daily, Fix Your Ears, they're all pretty similar. Essentially, what they want you to do is upload your hearing test, then they would pre-program the hearing aids, ship them out to you. Sometimes they're doing remote fine tuning, so adjustments via telehealth. Other times they're just counseling you or providing rudimentary customer support. Sometimes they'll have you ship the hearing aids back to them so they can make adjustments and then send them back to you. So it's a real grab bag of different things going on online. And a lot of these hearing aids are considered gray market, which means that some of the hearing aid manufacturers have said, look, if you buy these hearing aids online, we are not going to honor the warranty. And these companies are shut down fairly regularly, where once the manufacturer discovers that the sales contract is being violated and that the dispensers are selling the hearing aids online, they'll cut off the supply, and eventually the website will die. And people are stuck out there wearing these hearing aids, and they really have nowhere to turn if they have a problem. So there's no one there to help them if they need adjustments, and there's nowhere to send it if they need a repair. They'll have to pay for it because they have no warranty. So it's kind of problematic. I'm sure some of these sites are more reputable than others, but that's just kind of the overview of that. Right. So going back to that category of the non-bad actors. So this is the hearing aids that are essentially designed for online sale in one way or another. So the first category is mostly like big 6 hearing aids that are white labeled and with the intent of being sold online. So Audicus, you know, sells Unitron hearing aids online. Lively sells Resound. SoundBright is a new one that I found that's selling Signia. Lexi is actually Intricon, and I'll talk about some of their sales and service models. Hardware, so these are brands that are like more vertically integrated. EarGo, they're involved in the actual design and development of the products, manufactured in Thailand right now by a third party. But yeah, then you've got Olive, which is on an Indiegogo right now. That's a very cheap FDA registered hearing aid that is coming soon. Engage, that's one from Lucid Hearing. Orca is one that's really interesting. So they say they have an AI denoising platform. I'm not going to talk a lot about them, but they've essentially designed this product and they're selling it online. And then there's what I'm calling the Alibaba resellers. I'll talk more about that in another slide, but essentially where you've got a lot of the same looking products that are popping up online through different sales channels, and you can track down their source to Alibaba sometimes. Right, so just one example of each of those. So you've got sales and service. So this is the Lexi model, which is from HearX out of South Africa. They do a lot of interesting stuff in the audiology space. And they have this startup here in the US called Lexi. They're essentially taking the Intricon Lumen 155i and adding an app layer. They've got a modified app that does a few interesting things, allows the user to take a hearing test, configures the hearing aids based off of that, and some other interesting things that they're doing. And then they provide telecare through licensed practitioners remotely. So that's an interesting model. Lively is a little bit like that. Then you've got this Lucid one. So I just popped that up there, but it's $1,000 for a pair of made for iPhone hearing aids. Essentially, they come in a box to your house. You take them out of the box, put them on your ears. There's a few presets that you can select, and you can Bluetooth audio from an iPhone without any kind of accessory. So I had never seen that before in a direct consumer product. So that was very interesting. But yeah, Lucid produces those and sells them online, all vertically integrated. And then you've got the Alibaba aids. So, you can recognize all of these as being the same product. Luxotto Hearing, that's one. Neosonic is another brand. Hearing Assist is one that's selling on Walmart, and they actually do television ads. This is a pair that I have sitting on my desk right now. So this is from the actual supplier, New Sound. They don't ever, I don't think, sell them as New Sound to end users. They're always sold under a different brand name. And this is the actual Alibaba listing. So you can see here how inexpensive these products are to buy wholesale. And you can essentially get a customized logo and packaging. They'll even do you a customized app for your channel. And this is just an example of adding that service layer. So Luxotto, which sells this product, they say FDA guarantee, licensed professional support for life. So I don't know what the FDA guarantee is about. That doesn't mean anything, but they're adding professional support. I tried to ask them, what does licensed mean? But they didn't get back to me. So it's a really confusing market for consumers. I think there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of sellers. Some are probably very legitimate, others, who knows? So you're really taking some chances, I think, with some of these vendors. Right. And I kind of touched on some of this, but with these hearing aids, when you buy them, how are they fitted? There's essentially 3 different models for this. The first is preset selection. So essentially, you get the hearing aids. There might be a button on the hearing aids that you press to change the sound environment. So typically, they'll have 3 or 4 presets that are meant to hit some of the more common hearing test configurations or audiometric configurations. And sometimes you will cycle through those with a physical button press on the hearing aids. Sometimes there'll be an app that will give you those presets. Like in the case of EarGo, that's what they've done, is they give you those presets in an app, at least with their new product. So there's not really any fine-tuning customizability beyond what's available in those presets. Sometimes they'll add, volume up and down, or sometimes they'll add a bass treble controller or a more elaborate EQ. But there's not really the ability for a remote hearing care professional to dial in some more customized settings based on your particular hearing loss. And again, with this model, and pretty much with all of the models that I'm going to talk about with online sales, the access to customer support and telecare varies with the product, with the vendor. The second type that you might get for an online fitting is the NC2 Audiogram to first fit. So essentially what that means is you'll unbox the hearing aids, you'll download an app, and you'll put the hearing aids in your ears, and then pair the hearing aids with the app with your phone, and then you'll run through a hearing test where the hearing aids themselves will play beeps in your ears, and you'll respond via the app to tell the hearing aid app essentially when you're hearing those tones. And then the hearing aids will configure themselves based on whatever results were measured via that hearing test. So that process obviously is a black box. We don't know really, without doing a bunch of analysis, how all of these different manufacturers are going to apply gain and compression and all that sort of stuff based on the test result. And again, they might add the additional controls like bass and treble or EQ or volume. So that's a pretty different approach. And then the third approach, which I talked about earlier, is pre-program and ship. So that's where you'll essentially upload an audiogram, or you'll take an online hearing test. Audicus and Lively both do this, and a lot of others. And they will have a hearing care professional who will program the hearing aids and then put them in a box and send them to you. And so when you get them out of the box, they're supposed to be programmed up for your hearing loss. And then they'll typically provide follow-on care where You'll meet someone either via chat or video conference and basically tell them how you're doing. And oftentimes they'll be able to provide remote adjustments. Or in some cases, you'll have to return the hearing aids to them and they'll ship them back after they've made the tweaks for you. Okay, so basically, there's a lot going on in online sales. And I have this question, which is an open question: will online sales help consumers? So we have this traditional model. We know a fair amount about how much consumers benefit from that model and what the services are like. But we're just really starting to learn about online sales. There's not a lot of research into self-fit or remotely fit hearing aids. I'll go over a little bit about what I have found. So there's a couple ways I could see online sales helping. The big one is increased market penetration. So if we can get hearing aids on more people's ears that need them, I think we'll see more people benefiting from hearing aids, even if they're not achieving the best possible outcome that they could, for example, in a traditional model. So how could online sales help increase market penetration? The big one's probably lowering costs, but there are some other, we have an issue of consumers that live in remote areas that may not be able to reach audiological care. They just don't have access to it. So that's another place where online hearing aid sales could help. Maybe improving the customer journey or the experience with hearing care, maybe more satisfaction with that would mean more people are positive about it and more people tell their friends about what they've gone through, and maybe that helps market penetration. And then we've got marketing advances. So there's some big money moving into this industry and lots of money being spent on marketing that maybe wasn't being spent on marketing before. And so I think there's more people potentially being reached with messaging about hearing healthcare. And there's also more intelligent marketing happening. And that means, maybe we're reaching the right people with the right messaging to get more people to take action. And then the other big one is hearing outcomes. So will online sales help consumers? Will hearing outcomes become any better, or will we just penetrate the market better? So I'll talk about both of those broad topics. So the first thing is the market penetration. We have, according to MarketTrack, 38 million people in the US who have a hearing loss that interferes with communication. And then this graphic here is great because it shows the split for the different hearing loss levels, how many people own hearing aids versus don't own hearing aids. And you can see the target market for online hearing aid sales is that mild to moderate piece of the pyramid. So you have the vast majority of people with mild to moderate hearing loss basically don't have any hearing aids. So there seems to be a way that we could help there. And this was interesting from Hear.com's SEC filing. They said that the online channel only accounts for 1% to 2% of global hearing aid sales in 2019. I don't have a number for the US specifically, but I believe it would probably be fairly low by comparison with the traditional channel, which includes things like Costco and VA and everything else, and independent sales. So there's a lot of growth opportunity to reach more people with mild to moderate hearing loss online. So I threw this slide in today because some of you may not know that much about why does this matter? Like, why do we really care about increasing market penetration aside from the business opportunities? Why is it so important? And everyone knows that hearing aids give you better hearing, so that's obvious. But hearing aids do a lot of other things. These are all evidence-based findings. So I've been building this list over some time, and I decided to throw this in here just to give you guys an overview of why hearing aids are so important and why it matters so much to get hearing aids on more of the people that need them. So one of the big ones you probably know about is tinnitus. Hearing aids are probably the #1 treatment for tinnitus because it does help to alleviate and manage tinnitus when you wear hearing aids, assuming you have a hearing loss, because those two things are intrinsically linked. It can improve your confidence, improve relationships, lead to less social isolation. You become less dependent on others. There's a link between hearing loss and dementia, where hearing loss is a modifiable risk factor for dementia. Hearing aids can improve symptoms of anxiety and depression. They can even improve balance. And that's really weird. And we don't know why that is, but you can do tests where you put hearing aids on people. They're standing there on a foam block, and somehow having the hearing aids in means they fall over less. And so it's interesting, but yeah, it's another good reason to get hearing aids on people, because falls are a huge problem, especially in the elderly. Improved earning potential. So if you're working and you have a hearing loss and you get hearing aids, you actually get improved earning potential, and you're less likely to be unemployed. And then, of course, there's all these convenience factors. So audio streaming, phone calls, connectivity, all of these new things that hearing aids are bringing into the augmented field. One of the hearing aids that I tried recently gave you access to like Siri and Google Assistant. So you're getting some more of these convenience factors, which I think are a benefit to anyone who is using the product. Okay, so I told you we would go over some of the obstacles other than cost that are stopping people from getting hearing aids. This is from Market Track 10. So again, cost is a big one. A lot of people don't get hearing aids because they think they're too expensive or they're not worth it. Then there's vanity. That's another huge one. So 4 of these things, common responses to why people don't get hearing aids, have to do with vanity: too young for hearing aids, too embarrassing, too noticeable, unattractive. And then the third big category is benefit. So that you're not going to hear any better, right? Or that you already hear well enough. And that's obviously a hard one to get people to become informed about through marketing. I actually repeated this survey in a forum that I run on Facebook, the Hearing Aid Forum, and I found, interestingly, sort of the same top 3: cost, stigma, hearing well enough. Going into the cost factor, I started to make a little collection of all of these prices that are being surfaced on these different product pages for all these legitimate online sale hearing aids. And as you can see, it's all over the place. And I just threw the Costco Kirkland signature in there, almost like an anchor of what you can get a pair of, real top tier technology fitted in person for. And I made a little graphic of that as well, so you could see that there is a lot of spread on price. The average is somewhere up near $4,700 for a pair fitted in person. And as you can see, EarGo and all the others bring the price down significantly from that. But bearing in mind, you can get cheaper hearing aids from an independent. These are just the averages. You can get a pair for probably $2,000 fitted in person. And then you've got the Kirkland Signature, which is way down, right, compared to the average price of a pair of hearing aids. And it's pretty much top technology. And then you've got the even cheaper ones being sold online. So the Lucid Engage, which is that one that's got the presets, the Lexi, which is fairly inexpensive considering that they're doing more of a Telecare model. And then the Olive Pro, which is not released yet. They're going to be $299 when they're released. But yeah, so you've got a pretty wide spread, and there's probably a lot at that lower end that I haven't even discovered or cataloged. It's hard to tell which ones are FDA registered or not without doing a lot of digging. So I didn't try to catalog too many, but I'm pretty sure that there's going to be a lot of other ones that are in that $500, $600 range and lower. What is the impact of insurance? Every year, the number of people that get insurance or have insurance cover some or all of the cost of their hearing aids goes up. And that's a natural competitor to the online sale model. And then you've also got financing and subscription models, which on the online side is bringing the cost down even more, making it more accessible for people, right? So just as an example, with Alexi, you could get that for $49 a month or $7.99 once off, and Lively $78 a month. So you've got these financing and subscription models that are springing up that it's really just changing the whole calculus of the cost of hearing aids for a consumer, and same with the impact of insurance. So I can't really give you the sum of that yet, but I do think that overall the pricing is going down, and that's a good thing for consumers. And that should hopefully lead to greater market penetration. Time will tell. The other ones that I mentioned, vanity and benefit, I thought would be really cool to show you guys an ad, because EarGo has been running ads on YouTube, but also on television. And some of their ads have gotten a lot of views, a lot of traction. This one in particular, some might call it poor taste, but the reason I wanted to show it to you is because it hits on a lot of these common obstacles to getting hearing aids. So Just stop me if you can't hear it. I haven't tried to play it on a webinar before, so here we go.
Thanks for having us this weekend, Mrs. Garcia.
Yeah, thanks, Mom.
Of course, and I love those flowers.
Hey, did you bring the condom?
What's up?
Condom.
Condoms, Charlie. She wants to know if you brought any condoms.
Yeah, I brought some.
EarGo, a virtually invisible hearing loss solution with high-quality sound and lifetime support.
What made that ad for me was the end, right? This guy here is secretly wearing a pair of EarGos, and it speaks to a lot of these obstacles. These hearing aids that he's wearing, they're not embarrassing, they're not noticeable, they're not visible, they're not unattractive, and they give him the benefit, right? Like he's able to hear these whispers that presumably he wouldn't be able to hear otherwise. And that's very satisfying to him. So I think it's a pretty effective ad in that way. And obviously they've also hit on this whole idea of too young to have hearing aids, because the younger guy in the video, he's not hearing. Maybe he needs hearing aids too. So it's a good one. Some people hated it, but I thought it was clever. We'll skip the second one, but it's another one that kind of hits on some of this vanity and benefit stuff. If you're curious, from Lexi, it's called "Give Your Hearing the Glow Up It Deserves." It's pretty funny. So the other thing that I mentioned about market penetration is that we have a lot of people who can't easily get audiological help, right? Like they don't live near an audiologist, or they have to drive a really, really long way. And the current model, it isn't that great if you're not really close to a clinic, because you've got to do multiple trips, for testing and fitting and follow-up. So there is Telecare, which is becoming more significant, but I've already heard, as a lot of these clinics are going back to normal, the Telecare service is being offered less and less. So there was a strong uptick in the amount of Telecare that was being offered during the pandemic, while that was the only way to do business. But as foot traffic has come back to many of these places, Telecare isn't being offered as regularly as it was. So it's hard. Audiologists, when they're with a person in the clinic and they can do hands-on with a patient, for example, to show them how to put the hearing aids in or how to clean the hearing aids, that's a pretty efficient use of time. Trying to do those things online with the challenges of technology through video, it's just not as easy, especially when you're dealing with a population of people who maybe aren't as tech savvy, some of which maybe have dementia or have, mobility issues or dexterity problems. Telecares can be challenging. So I think there is a need for more availability of products and services for hearing loss in these remote areas. Audiologists tend to locate in metropolitan counties with higher median household incomes, younger populations, and lower proportions of older adults reporting hearing difficulty. So essentially, we need audiologists spread around the map a lot better than they are. And since it's realistically probably not going to happen, the best alternative that we have is to try to provide more remote care services or online self-fit services. Something really interesting that someone said to me was that if you're relying on private pay as an audiologist, which most audiologists are relying primarily on private pay, they need to live by the people that can afford the relatively expensive private pay hearing aids. So that's why they're all in the metros and not out in the rural areas where maybe people can't afford their services or those products. So there is a need, there's a problem. So this was from Hear.com's SEC filing. This is about the customer journey. Can we improve the customer journey? It says the traditional channel has faced limited competition and innovation and has thus made little investment in the consumer experience. The entire process from obtaining a hearing aid to fitting is lengthy and can take multiple weeks to several months of in-person clinic visits. This process can be cumbersome and result in limited consumer satisfaction. I don't know that I agree with limited consumer satisfaction, because in general, if you look at clinics, the net promoter scores, they're really high, like higher than most businesses. So I think people are actually pretty happy. But can this journey be improved? This little graphic from EarGo shows what I was saying before. There's a lot of trips involved. There's a lot of waiting involved. And EarGo's kind of compelling. It's saying, look, we're going to get you the hearing aids in as little as 3 days, and we're going to consult with you remotely. and you can return the product if you're not happy. That seems kind of better, right? If you don't know a lot about all this, and maybe it is, the jury's still out. So we'll see whether improvements in customer journey can lead to better market penetration. Having these alternative models probably won't hurt in that regard. And then this is just a graphic to show just how much money is being pumped into advertising, which I think is actually great. So where I had a couple of numbers to go off of was the SEC filings from EarGo and Here.com. They're up around $20 million in 2019 for advertising, and higher than that even in 2020. They're doing display advertising, email marketing, affiliate marketing, direct response television, national reach television, select print, radio advertising. So they're doing everything. They're trying to reach people everywhere, which is a really good thing. So more people are getting the messaging, all these types of messages that might help people to start to overcome some of these obstacles that they have. I think it's good that we have smart marketers out there working to try to help people understand the importance of doing something about their hearing problem. So I'm pretty excited about this. I think there's going to be more and more money coming into it as more companies start up and get more funding, especially with the over-the-counter hearing aid thing coming. So the other question I had was about better hearing outcomes. So, can online hearing aids essentially meet or exceed the hearing benefit that you can get in a clinic? When we fit a hearing aid in a clinic, we take the hearing aid, we put it on the person's ear with a little probe microphone that goes down into their ear canal, and then calibrated speech sound comes out of the speaker of this little device, and we can actually see how much gain is being applied for soft input levels, medium input levels, loud input levels. So we can essentially create the gain and compression that's needed to match a prescriptive target, which is the result of decades worth of research into giving people the best possible sound that's going to give them the best understanding of speech without over amplifying things for them. So that is pretty robust. We have a lot of data to support that this is a really good way to fit hearing aids. Now, this obviously can't really be done online, with a hearing aid that's shipped to you, at least not today with the current technology. And so that does bring some concerns to mind that maybe people can't get the best possible outcome. I thought it might be interesting for you guys to see a graph of what we would see as a clinician on the screen, where you see these different colored lines, purple, red, and teal. And right now you can see the dotted lines, that's essentially the target. And then the fainter solid line, that's the output of the hearing aid. So essentially what we would do is we'd maybe bring down, the low pitches a little bit, bring up the pitches around 3, 4K and higher, to try to match those targets. And that's going to give people a good sound that's going to give them a lot of benefit. The reason we do this is it's been shown to maximize audibility, benefit satisfaction, minimizes overamplification, loudness, discomfort. Every hearing aid company has its own idea of how much amplification to provide as a default. So if I fire up a hearing aid fitting software from Phonak or Oticon or Resound, and I put in your audiogram, your hearing test results, and then I say, calculate first fit, it's going to give you a different result based on every manufacturer and even every hearing aid that you fit. So the reason we do this is so that we can standardize the output rather than just going, okay, well, what did the manufacturer suggest today? And it also reduces follow-up visits and reduces the amount of hearing aids that come back. So there's a good business reason to do it. And that chart at the bottom, some data from Hearing Tracker just showing the correlation between satisfaction and benefit. So, when people hear better with their hearing aids, they are going to be more satisfied. So moving on to the online. So I kind of went over this a little bit with the preset selection, NC2 Audiogram, and pre-program. For each of those, I've tried to give a little guess on what the best possible outcome is. With a preset selection, essentially, it depends on how well the presets match the gain requirements of the individual. So if they just happen to have the quintessential average audiogram and the preset selection includes one preset for average audiogram, well, then they might do okay, right? They might be just fine. They might get a perfect fitting, but it's not going to fit everybody all the time. So one thing that's kind of interesting is that the data that I've looked at has shown that if you give people a 3-band EQ and allow them to adjust bass, mids, and treble, there is an increased likelihood that they are going to get closer to what the audiologist would have done with a verified output measurement. So maybe preset selection is okay so long as you give people the ability to fine tune things a little bit. And that is happening in the real world. So that's a good thing. Although I couldn't find anyone that went out into the field and found random people wearing these self-fitted devices and measured them to see how close they were. Then we have the NC2 Audiogram. You could kind of think of that as the manufacturer's first fit, where it depends on the manufacturer. If you test your hearing aid through the devices that are sent to you in the mail and then have the amplification calculated based on that, basically it would vary wildly depending on the manufacturer's approach to prescribing amplification. I couldn't find any data on outcomes. And again, this could be improved by giving the user some ability to adjust the amplification themselves. And then there's the pre-program and ship model. This is essentially also the same as a manufacturer's first fit, because what's going to happen is when you upload your audiogram or do the online hearing check and someone pre-programs your hearing aids and then ships them to you, they're basically giving you the manufacturer's first fit. And that's where you're going to start when you take the hearing aids out of the box. And maybe that's improved if you're given some ability to adjust the hearing aid yourself, or if there's some remote sessions where the hearing care provider, if there is one, where they would make adjustments beyond what the first fit was. Okay, so, and then I've got a couple of really interesting studies here to talk about. One is the Bose Prototype hearing aid and the app, which was developed by Eddie Sabin. It's a really interesting concept. So what he has done is he's got 36 typical audiograms, essentially, that drive the gain and compression for the loudness wheel across 12 frequency bands. So as you're scrolling up or down on that loudness wheel, you're scrolling across all of these different potential profiles, not just in terms of the gain across all these bands, but also compression. And then there's a fine tuning wheel which adjusts tilt, spectral tilt. And this, he says, is designed to approximate some of the typical adjustments that occur during clinician-driven fine tuning. And they did a really cool study where they essentially gave people different versions of this. So they had an audiologist fitting tool where the audiologist could fit these earbuds to each individual to best possible using real ear measurements. And then they allowed people to go into two groups. One group could control the volume only, and the other group could use these two wheels as intended. Then they could do like A/B comparisons versus what was given to them by the audiologist. And essentially what happened was that the self-fit group, the group that went off with the two wheels, they made their own adjustments essentially from scratch and ended up very close in most cases to what the audiologists have done with real ear measurements. And the preference for their own settings when they compared it to the audiologist prescribed settings was higher. So they preferred their own settings, and there was no differences in terms of standard clinical measures of hearing aid benefit or speech perception and noise. So essentially, these people that had the ability to do it on their own using this novel approach ended up in a place where they had about as much amplification, they got the same amount of benefit, but they were happier with the sound quality than the amplification that was provided for them. So to me, that says that the self-fitting approach, it's very viable. It's just how you do it. So this seems like a really cool approach that works. And I think we're going to see more and more of this kind of thing over time. And then this is another new world that's springing up, which is, I think, really relevant to the future of online sales, which is the whole concept of sound separation or AI denoising. Whisper has a hearing aid that uses this thing called the Whisper Brain, which they call their sound separation engine. And essentially it has like 300 billion operations per second. And you can see this little graphic down here, this showing just how much further advanced that is from any other hearing aid, which tries to do onboard operations. This one moving the operations to this brain, they have so much more computational capability and obviously power to do more of these AI-driven denoising or sound separation tasks. And it's really cool because it continues to learn as people go into different environments, you know, what is the ideal sound separation or denoising for those different environments to yield the best possible outcomes. Right now, this hearing aid is just being fit through traditional sales channel by audiologists, but you look at this technology and the potential when it's combined with something like what Andy's done with this fitting approach. So you're giving people the audibility that they need, and then we can bake in this concept of denoising, which is going to address the number one problem that people have, which is difficulty hearing in background noise. So I think we're moving in a really interesting direction. And this is just something else that I saw while I was browsing LinkedIn the other day, which is really cool. Essentially a totally novel approach to fitting a product, which is that you're playing these different speech sounds. So one guy talks, then the other guy talks, and you say which one you like better. You just click on the guy's head that you like the best. And it essentially goes through a number of different iterations of modifying the signal until you find the signal that you prefer the most. So instead of having this wheel approach or clicking an EQ, it's actually taking you through optimizing speech by actually listening to speech. And it says in the background, machine learning algorithms automatically obtain amplification parameters from user preferences. So that's pretty cool. I did just throw in this chart here. This is some data from our website, I think from like 20,000 people who have taken a survey about their priorities when it comes to hearing aids. And the number one thing is hearing and noise. So these technologies, the AI technology in particular, I think is going to possibly be even the biggest thing that's going to impact that market penetration if hearing aids can finally address that number one problem.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Abram, for the great presentation.